Hello everyone, welcome aboard. As we go around, I'll tell you a little about the discovery of copper here and the history of the mine and of Moonta. These were some of the largest and richest copper mines in the world and helped to save the state of South Australia from bankruptcy. Copper was first discovered at a place now called Wallaroo Mines in 1859. A smelter and port were built at Wallaroo to process the ore and export it. Ore was later taken from the Moonta mines to Wallaroo by bullock train, which was a very slow process, taking 2 days each way. The whole area of Wallaroo, Kadina and Moonta was leased by Walter Watson Hughes, a retired Scottish sea captain. He came out to Australia in 1840 and ran sheep in this area. Captain Hughes had asked all his shepherds to watch out for any signs of copper, which was indicated by greenish-coloured rocks or green flames in their campfires, and offered a reward of £6 a week as an incentive. Sure enough, in 1861, one of his shepherds named Paddy Ryan discovered signs of copper just near here, supposedly in rocks near a wombat burrow. Paddy and some others decided that they would like to have a copper mine of their own, so they went off to Adelaide to register their mine. Unfortunately, they had not drawn a very good map and were a bit vague on details, so their claim was rejected. Back they came to Moonta to have another go. Paddy's trip took a while, and meanwhile, Captain Hughes had been told about Paddy's discovery. When Paddy got back to Moonta, Captain Hughes had a word with him and made him an offer of a 10th share of the mine if he would tell him where the copper was. Paddy accepted this because he still intended to claim the mine himself anyway, and so Paddy's group set off to Adelaide again. However, Captain Hughes very quickly got the area surveyed, made out a good set of documents, and sent his fastest horse rider, William Horn, down to Adelaide to try to beat Paddy to the registry office. Now we will stop just up ahead, and then I'll tell you what happened next. So, we left William Horn racing off to Adelaide to beat Paddy. Well, Mr. Horn managed to get to Adelaide in 17 hours. That may sound like a long time to us today, but remember that at the time, it could take people several days to get to Adelaide. Mind you, William Horn exhausted 8 horses to cover the 100 miles. William got to Adelaide early in the morning and went to Captain Hughes' agent, gave him the documents, and told him to get to the registry office straight away, and then William went for a good long sleep. When the agent got to the office, Paddy's group was already there. However, the registry clerk was a bit late, and when he arrived, he served Captain Hughes' agent first. When it was Paddy's turn, he was told, "Sorry, you're too late. This area has already been registered to Captain Hughes." Well, as you can imagine, Paddy and his friends were not happy, so various court proceedings were threatened. However, the matter was finally settled out of court. Captain Hughes kept the mine, and Paddy got his 1/10 share and £6 a week. Unfortunately, poor old Paddy, who was a bit fond of his grog, died in 1862 at the Leasingham Hotel at Leasingham, over towards Clare, apparently of alcohol poisoning, before he collected any of his reward. However, his wife inherited the £6 a week and did very well out of it, buying a house and farm at Seven Hill near Clare, which is still there today. The Tipperary Mining Company was formed, and you can see this first shaft in front of you, Ryan's Shaft, named after Paddy, of course. This was a huge success, and in the first 20 months they took out 8,000 tonnes of ore at an average of 25% copper. To put that in context, these days mining companies are very happy if they can get 1% of copper out of their ore. For instance, the yield at Roxby Downs is less than 1%. Ryan's Shaft made a profit of £64,000, about $19 million in today's money, in that first 20 months, and the future of the mine took off from there. Due to Walter Watson Hughes' concern about lack of education in the state, he used some of his vast wealth to donate to the founding of the University of Adelaide. The mines developed quickly, drawing in miners from all over the state, especially from Burra, where the mines were reducing output at that time. Eventually the mine had more than 70 major shafts, and the total length of the workings underneath is now about 135 kilometres. However, there were not enough miners to keep up with the expansion, so the company sent back to Cornwall and said, "Send us more miners." This resulted in a major influx of Cornish miners and their families, which in turn led to this area being famous for its Cornish heritage. At its peak, the mine employed 2,500 men and boys and operated continuously for 62 years. Its total output was 170,000 tonnes of copper and made a profit of £11 million in the currency of the day. It was closed in 1923 due to the falling price of copper after World War I. Now we'll move on. Across the road in front of us, you can see a big heap of dirt, and there is another one over to the right in the distance. These are called tailings, or skim heaps, and contain the waste from the early stages of the concentrating process. In all of these dumps and the slime pits, there was an estimated 25,000 tonnes of copper. They wanted to extract it, but didn't know how to do it. After asking around mining communities throughout the world, they found a Spanish engineer called Antonio Delgado at the Rio Tinto mine in Spain, who had developed a method to do this. Experiments with a view to dealing effectively with the ooze. By December of that year, he had designed and built a plant that was capable of producing approximately 1,000 tonnes of copper per year, timber and filled with rusty old scrap metal. These were an essential part of the process, and I'll tell you more about that a bit later. To the wash and dry plant. Now, if I can have your attention for a few minutes, I'll explain what this building was for, and then you can have a look around. This place was constructed in 1899 as part of the treatment plant to reprocess the tailings heap and slime pits to recover the copper that was contained in them. The flowchart on the wall inside describes the process that was used, called the precipitation process, and the photographs show in sequence the actual operation of the plant. It was called the wash and dry plant because the copper yielded by the precipitation process was brought here to be washed to remove the dirt and impurities and dried to make it easier to handle when transported to the smelters at Wallaroo. We will move on down the track a short way, and then you'll be able to get off the train to have a look around the building.
Unfortunately, because of COVID, we can't get off the train, so I'll just get off and go up onto the concrete floor and just explain the process to you. The Moonta Mines production can sort of be divided into two, pre-1900 and post-1900. Pre-1900, the extraction of the copper from the ore was pretty basic and very inefficient, even though they still managed to extract an enormous amount of copper. But as it was mentioned in the commentary, it was considered that there was still about 25,000 tonne of copper in those tailings heaps. Now, Antonio Delgado came out from Spain, from Rio Tinto, in 1900, and he reckoned he had the process to be able to get all the copper, or a lot of that copper, out of those tailings heaps. He arrived in Moonta, came out to Moonta Mines, and he couldn't believe how dry it was, such a dry area. So his process was going to take a lot of water, a lot. So he thought, righto, we'll use seawater. So if you go down to Moonta Bay and stand at the beginning of the Moonta Bay jetty and look south, down along the beach, about 200 or 300 metres down, you'll see, particularly on a low tide, a lot of rocks going out into the ocean. And if you walk down there, you'll notice there's a 60 centimetre diameter steel pipe going out into the ocean. And on the sand dunes from that pipe was a huge pumping station. That water was going to be used for this process. Now that Moonta Mines had, just as an aside, the largest and most comprehensive engineering workshops anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. And so everything that could be made in the workshops was made, and that was a lot of stuff. And so that 60 centimetre pipe, steel pipe, was made up in the engineering workshops. Because iron doesn't work very well with seawater, they decided they'd have to line that pipe with timber. So that made it quite a complicated process, getting inside the pipes, lining it with timber, joining it all together and making a whopping great big long pipe up to the pumping station. Anyhow, it was done, and the water was pumped from the sea up to a holding tank or holding tanks at the high point of the Moonta township, which is just up from the Moonta area school. And from there, that water was gravity fed then down through pipes to a place which we'll be going past in a minute, just in front of us. Now, sulphuric acid is a byproduct of the smelters, and the smelters, the Welsh were working the smelters over at Wallaroo, and a byproduct there was sulphuric acid, and so Antonio Delgado used that sulphuric acid, brought it over here, so it's constantly being brought over here, and he mixed that with the seawater to make a weak solution of sulphuric acid. That sulphuric acid was then pumped or piped in earthenware pipes, 23 centimetre diameter earthenware pipes, so they're big ones, to the tops of the 4 main tailings heaps. We just went through one of the tailings heaps. That was Ryan's tailings heap. If you do happen to go out to Richmond's engine house, there's 2 big tailings heaps out there with Richmond's. And if you happen to go down to the miner's cottage on the way back to Moonta, back into the township, go out and have a look at the miner's cottage. It's a terrific setup there. Next to that is Hancock's tailings heap. So this weak solution of sulphuric acid was pumped to the top of each of those tailings heaps, the 4 tailings heaps. You'll notice that the tailings heaps have got a flat top, level, very level. And at the top they made lots of little dams. It's like a lattice work or a chessboard or a draft board of just covered with little reservoirs, no more than half a metre high or deep. And that sulphuric acid was pumped into all of those, and that sulphuric acid was able to percolate down through the tailing heap, and there'd be a chemical reaction because the sulphuric acid would combine or react to the copper sulphides that was in the tailings heaps to make copper sulphate. And that copper sulphate kept going down through, percolating down through the tailings heaps, and around the base, the perimeter of each of the tailings heaps was built a channel. And so the copper sulphate solution would drain down into the channels, the 4 channels. The copper sulphate solution was filthy. It was full of clay and colloidal solution stuff and all sorts of muck and rubbish. So it wasn't a very pretty solution, but it was a copper sulphate solution. Those canals were all joined into the same drain, and that drain, again through, it was gravity fed, down, brought the copper sulphate solution into those precipitation tanks that we just drove past. Just to let you know how much water was being used, 180,000 litres of copper sulphate solution was going into those precipitation tanks every hour. 180,000 litres. When the solution was in the tanks, they would then put rust or old metal that wasn't required anymore, scrap metal, into the tanks. And that would cause another reaction with the copper sulphate. The copper that was in solution would become out of solution as a solid and precipitate down to the bottom of the tanks. And so down the bottom of the tanks you've got all the copper. When that occurred, they would drain all the liquid off the top, and there's 2 big drains going from the precipitation tanks down behind us here down to another place down the bottom called the settling tanks, where that liquid would be left to settle, and the liquid at the top, if there was any, came back on a return drain back to get sulphuric acid added into it and then sort of continue with the cycle. The copper that was left in the precipitation tanks was then shoveled into railway carriages and brought to a spot right here where you are now in front of me. There's a little floor here, and the copper was shoveled out onto this little floor, and it was absolutely filthy dirty. And with hoses, again using seawater, it was washed, turned over, washed, and so on, and kept washing it until it was nice and clean. All the filthy, dirty liquid was going down through here. These little walls are built out here to slow the liquid down, so it didn't just rush down. By slowing it down, it means solids would sort of drop out of it, and eventually go into these tanks where more stuff would drop out that was missed, end up in the end tank, and there's a drain at the bottom. There's a hole in the top of the wall of the end tank. The water would sort of waterfall over that and then go into drains and go down to the settling tanks. Anyhow, back here you've got lovely clean copper, and so that was then shoveled out here and spread over this floor to dry. Today would have been a perfect drying day. If it wasn't a very good drying day, it would be shoveled onto the hot plate back in the corner. You probably noticed there were 2 furnaces underneath that, and it would be put over there, turned over to dry, then brought back out here. You have to appreciate that this area here is only one part of a big production line, starting from the ocean to the sulfuric acid area, to the tops of the heaps, to the precipitation tanks to here. It's a continuous process. You've only got to have one process go slow or break down, just like building a car, and that stuffs up the whole